Please welcome National Trails System Specialist with the National Park Service, Lindsay Briscoe. Lindsay provides technical assistance and serves as a liaison to nonprofit organizations, federal and state agencies, and other partners. Additionally, she supports the development and implementation of long-range strategies for the National Trails System, advancing shared goals through project management, policy analysis, and funding coordination. Lindsay is committed to fostering strong partnerships that protect, enhance, and connect the nation's scenic, historic, and recreational trails. Outside of the office, Lindsay's passion for trails runs deep as she's thru-hiked long trails, domestic and abroad, including the Appalachian, Pacific Crest, and Continental Divide National Scenic Trails, as well as the Oregon Desert Trail and the Hadrian's Wall in England. When she's not working or walking, Lindsay enjoys trail running ultras, skiing, and snowshoeing in Colorado with her wife and puppy. Take it away, Lindsay.
Yeah, thank you all so much. I'm going to share my screen here. Let me know when you can see it.
I see it on my end.
Perfect. Okay, I'm also just going to take off my camera just for any bandwidth issues. So, perfect. All right, you can still see my screen, I hope.
Yes, we can.
Okay, perfect. Yes. Well, yeah, first of all, thank you all so much for inviting me. Thank you, Nick, for having me to talk about National Trails System. This is, of course, my passion. It's the work I do, what I love to do in my free time. As Nick said, I'm the National Trails System Specialist with the Washington Support Office. I'm physically located in Eagle, Colorado, which is about 2 hours due west of Denver up in the Rocky Mountains. And tonight I'll be talking about the National Trails System. So with that, let's get into it. So a little bit about the agenda tonight. We're going to talk about the National Trails System, of course, the background of it, National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, National Recreation Trails, and then some other odds and ends kind of thrown in there as well. Then we'll have a question and answer at the end.
Straight up already to start.
And when we're talking about abbreviations, because, hey, I'm with the government and we love our abbreviations, if you see these dropped into the presentation anywhere, you might see NST, which is a National Scenic Trail, an NHT, which is a National Historic Trail, an NRT, which is a National Recreation Trail, or NWT, which is a National Water Trail. You might also see an NSHT to make things even more confusing. Sometimes National Scenic and Historic Trails are abbreviated together, so that's what that means. And when we talk about the National Trail System background, the National Trail System is made up of three main types of trails: the National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, and National Recreation Trails. National Scenic and Historic Trails are designated by an act of Congress, whereas the National Recreation Trails are administratively designated, and that usually means by the Secretary of the Interior, if they're related to Department of Interior. And so I'll say that a couple more times, but that's one key difference between historic trails, scenic trails, and then recreation trails. And here on the screen right now, I'm showing the map of National Historic Trails and National Scenic Trails. As you can see, wide breadth completely across the country, and you can see the North Country National Scenic Trail on there as well. And then when I flip to the next slide, it barely looks like anything changed, but you might have noticed that there are some now dots on the map, and these dots represent national recreation trails. So overall, there's over 1,300 just national recreation trails alone. So you can see that they're dispersed all over the country. With the national recreation trails, historic trails, and scenic trails, we have every state, including DC, represented for where trails are located. And a little history too about national scenic trails. So, like so many landmark conservation laws that have happened, throughout the years, the National Trail System Act was actually a result of the environmental era of 1960, and the act established the National Scenic Trails. The National Trail System, including the National Scenic Trails, but the National Trail System. So during this era, there was increased concern over water, air pollution, as well as concern over loss of natural landscapes as the public and the population spread into previously unspoiled areas around the country. And Lyndon Johnson outlined these concerns in his 1965 speech to Congress, where Johnson made the case that it was our responsibility to preserve the natural beauty of our country for future generations. So I'll just say that again, to preserve the natural beauty of our country for future generations. I think that's so impactful there, that small statement. And if we didn't show restraint in our actions now, we might actually lose these places forever. So he outlined the importance of people's access to natural landscapes, and that included health and fitness too. That was a major part of the National Trails system. And then with that, he tasked the Department of the Interior with recommending a cooperative program for encouraging a national system of trails that would serve people both in urban areas and backcountry. And I think that's another very important part of the National Trails system is that we highlight urban areas and backcountry. I think, myself included, so many times I see national scenic trails, historic trails, rec trails, and I think, okay, I'm going to be out in the wilderness in the backcountry. And that is true. That exists, and we all love those places. But there's also urban areas and urban trails as well, which is really important because that's just going to span the country and really have availability for all to be on a trail somewhere. So the Department of the Interior then recommended a national system of long distance trails that would serve every population, providing opportunities for extended foot, horseback, and bicycle trips, as well as some other modes of transportation as well. These national trails would serve as backbones of other trail systems branching out into natural areas, and the routing, construction, maintenance, and marking of these trails would set a standard of excellence. So again, the thought process there is we have this awesome network of trails, and then from that, other trails can spur off them as well. Each national scenic trail then would stand out in its own right as a recreational resource of superlative quality. This report that Lyndon B. Johnson asked for also outlined some management principles. And we'll get into these a little bit further, but this just gives a background. Each trail would be administered by a lead agency, or there's also two that have some co-agency leads as well, and that environmental controls would be necessary to safeguard each trail's scenic character. So these principles then were incorporated into the National Trails System Act, and it was signed into law on October 2nd, 1968. And so then also as well in that same day, just for context, Johnson also signed the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act into law as well, which I think is pretty cool. There were also, I think, a couple of other national parks that were signed into law that day. So it was a big day for public land. And these laws all grounded in the philosophy of conservation and preserving wild, free-flowing rivers and unaltered landscapes. So again, future generations can experience and appreciate the country's natural beauty. The National Trails System Act established a framework for developing a system of congressionally designated interconnected landscapes for recreation and conservation. So I think, that's all really powerful. It speaks so much to the land and the beauty behind the land. And the purpose of these national trails can be broken down into three areas: providing public with recreational opportunities, promoting the preservation and appreciation of America's scenic and historic resources, and engaging the public in development and maintaining of these trails. So I know that's a lot there that I gave you the history, but I think, if you ever want to go and read the National Trails System Act, maybe if you're trying to fall asleep one night, you could have it as a read, but there are some really beautiful parts of it as well that I think almost read as, a form of poetry. And I think all you might think that as well with how much we appreciate our public land. And here are a couple areas of the actual act that I wanted to just pull out and share for you all. So considerations for determining establishment of trails. And I'll just read it from the screen. The National Trail System provides for the ever-increasing outdoor recreation needs of an expanding population, which we kind of talked about before, promotes the preservation of public access to, travel within, and enjoyment and appreciation of the open air, outdoor areas, and historic resources of the nation. So again, all the kind of background I went into, that kind of captures it all, I think, right there pretty well. And that is taken from the National Trail System Act. The other part I wanted to highlight, knowing who's on the call, is the volunteer citizen involvement. This is also in the Act as well, right up towards the front, that Congress recognizes the valuable contributions that volunteers and private nonprofit trail groups have made to the development and maintenance of the nation's trails. In recognition of these contributions, it is further the purpose of the chapter to encourage and assist volunteer citizen involvement in planning, development, maintenance, and management where appropriate of trails. There are many times in the Act that talk about how important volunteerism is. So that's highlighted all through, and hopefully I can highlight that completely through it, during the presentation. Some other things about the National Trail System Act. So kind of what I outlined before is out of, what came out of that are three main types of trails: the National Scenic Trails, National Historic Trails, and National Recreation Trails. I think a lot of people know a lot about scenic trails and historic trails, maybe a little bit less about recreation trails, but I'll kind of go through all of them here. So National Scenic Trails provide maximum outdoor recreation potential. These are normally, significant. They are historic in nature. They're natural. There's cultural qualities. These are the big ones: the North Country National Scenic Trail, the Appalachian National Scenic Trail. There's tons that go across the country. A lot of times you think of these on, hiking on foot in the backcountry. There's also National Historic Trails, and we'll get down into the nitty-gritty of kind of each one. But National Historic Trails, and these follow as closely as possible and practical to the original trails or routes of travel of national historic significance. And we'll give examples later, but think, Lewis and Clark or the Trail of Tears. And protection of historic route and its historic remnants and artifacts for public use and enjoyment. And then the third is National Recreation Trails. So these provide a variety of outdoor recreation uses or reasonably accessible to urban areas. So it's urban areas, but I also like to think of these where, you all are lucky you have the North Country National Scenic Trail right in your backyard. Some folks don't have a national scenic or historic trail that's really close, but anybody from the public can recommend a national recreation trail to be reviewed and then potentially designated. And so these trails are a network. If we kind of think about that map back that we looked at across the country, so they might be more local to folks, might get them out moving before they can actually go explore a historic or scenic trail. And a unique aspect of the National Scenic and Historic Trail system is the management, because it's multi-jurisdictional nature of these trails. So since they cross federal, state, and local jurisdictions, as well as private property, you need different agencies all working together. And interagency and intergovernmental cooperation and coordination, as well as landowner, local community engagement, it's all important in protecting that trail corridor. In order to promote the cooperation across jurisdictions, Congress designed the act so that when you are managing one of these, you can manage or administer one of these trails, and it identifies the agency responsible for, again, that administration of the trail. Again, you can't, these trails, they're different in parks in ways that, parks do sometimes cross different types of land, but because as you all know, the large quantity of miles that these trails cross, they will cross every type of land known. And so it's really in our best interest and the public's best interest to have this multi-jurisdictional nature about these trails. So the administering agency includes either the United States Forest Service, the National Park Service, or the Bureau of Land Management. And I mentioned before, it can be one of those, or it can also be co-administered as well. And then we get into some specifics about, one of the most frequently asked questions that we get is, what is the difference between administering and managing when it comes to trails? So there are some bullet points on the screen there for administration and trail management. I just talked a lot about administration, but administration is really trail-wide coordination. Each national trail established by law is assigned for an administration to one or two federal agencies by either the Secretary of the Interior or the Secretary of Agriculture, depending DOI or Department of Ag, as designed by Congress. So it's subject to available funding. The administering agencies exercise trail-wide responsibilities under the Act for that specific trail. Such responsibilities include coordination among and between agencies and partner organizations in planning, marking, certification, resource preservation and protection, interpretation, cooperative interagency agreements, and financial assistance to other cooperative government agencies. So again, you can kind of read the list on the left and see. Then when we switch over to trail management, so this is more of like the on-site type stuff that happens. So it's on-site jurisdiction. And various government and private entities own or manage lands along the national trail. So management responsibilities often include inventorying of resources so that you can do that with boots on the ground, mapping, planning, and development of trail segments or sites, compliance, provision to appropriate public access, site interpretation, trail maintenance. I mean, again, the list kind of goes on and on. And to give you an example, we'll just take like the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail. So that trail is administered by the U.S. Forest Service, but it runs through Yosemite, in one case in California. So that section of the trail is then managed by the NPS. So hopefully that gives you kind of an understanding on how the administration versus management work in certain circumstances. And this is just an org chart that we have to kind of outline for y'all how it works. So as you can see, there's a Washington support office that I'm a part of and my supervisor's a part of, and we're actually part of this group called Partnerships for Civic Engagement. That's where we're located. But then when we look at each trail specifically, there's a superintendent usually associated with each trail, and they actually sit in the region. So this gives just a nice org chart showing how the trails interact and kind of where I'm located in comparison to all the trails. So then getting into national scenic trails. So these trails are up to 100 miles long. You know, if you're really paying attention, you know your national scenic trails, there is one that's less than 100 miles long. So that's just a general rule of 100 miles, but of course, in every case, there might be an outlier. They're 100 miles or longer. They're continuous and located to provide for maximum outdoor recreation potential and conservation and enjoyment for the nationally significant qualities of the area which such trails may pass. Sometimes too, I mean, when we talk about these trails, it's a lot about the trail corridor as well. So you have the actual trail, but then it's about the scenic views and the view sheds, even outside of just that 18 inches of tread. The first two trails designated by the National Trail System Act were the Appalachian National Scenic Trail and the Pacific Crest National Scenic Trail. And then since then, it's been amended many times to include national scenic and historic, other national scenic trails and national historic trails as well. And then here, just give a list of the 11 national scenic trails. So as you can see on there, North Country National Scenic Trail is well represented. And then some other facts about national scenic trails. Let's see here. Other facts about national scenic trails pass through 34 states. I mean, that's pretty incredible to have that wide range for just national scenic trails alone. The longest national scenic trail is North Country Trail, and checked with Nicole, and she corrected me and said that trail, it's now 4,800 miles, which is fantastic. So these trails can, of course, be day hiked, section hiked, and through hiked. We get a lot of questions. Is it just through hikers that enjoy these trails? But no, I mean, as you all probably know, tons of hours are spent day hiking these trails, even section hiking them. On certain trails too, bikes are allowed and equestrian access as well. And that can be trail by trail specific. And again, trying to stress the importance of volunteers, clubs, and partners. You all are the backbone of the national scenic trails and national trails as well. And just to note too, several national scenic trails, they're not complete yet. They're it's supposed to be gaps, not gaps, but gaps in the connectivity of them that we're still looking to close. And then talking about three guiding plans for national scenic trails. So you have comprehensive plans, land management plans, and then also project plans that are associated with national scenic trails. And just a quick overview on those. A comprehensive plan is a trail-wide guidance for administration and management versus a land management plan, which addresses management of the land, and that often includes land around the trail as well. And then you have project plans, and this addresses specific projects or activities that support implement the direction and other plans. So that if you know, again, if you want a good read, maybe it puts you to sleep, hopefully not. No, but if you want a good read, you can go to these trails and actually look up their comprehensive plan and see, when it was made, what it's all about. Give it a read and see what you think, and you can compare them to between different trails and actually understand what makes this trail this trail. So then moving on to National Historic Trails. National Historic Trails, they must also be at least 100 miles long and follow trails and routes of travel of national historic significance. So again, you can kind of see the difference there between um, scenic trails and historic trails. They are designed by Congress in order to identify and protect these historic routes and any artifacts or traces associated with them. So, for example, Lewis and Clark's exploration route, the Trail of Tears. There's also the Flight of the Nez Perce Native Americans. These are all National Historic Trails. And National Scenic and Historic Trails are important for several reasons. As we've mentioned before, they showcase the richness of America and our natural and cultural heritage. They promote preservation of some of the nation's most iconic landscapes, and they commemorate important events and movement in our nation's history. And that's again kind of right there in that sentence. They also connect people to their public lands and our shared history. They generate citizen stewards, and they promote the unique nature and purpose of each individual trail. So another, I think, really interesting thing is to look through each trail and for yourself to kind of decipher what's unique about each one. I mean, I think you can find some similarities between each trail, whether, if it's the landscape that they hike through or walk through or move through. But then there's also really significant differences that outline why each trail is different and needed as part of the National Trail System. And here are the 21 National Historic Trails.
Hey.
Won't read them all, but if you want to go and look them up, these are them. And then a couple facts about National Historic Trails as well. As I mentioned earlier, together, National Historic Trails and National Scenic Trails pass through all 50 states, including DC. That's pretty incredible in my book that they have such wide breadth. Some of the longest National Historic Trails are the Trail of Tears, California National Historic Trail, and Lewis and Clark National Historic Trail. And these, again, are also designated by Congress, just as National Scenic Trails are. So then moving to National Recreation Trails. This is going to kind of walk a little bit through the process. So National Recreation Trails, because they can be designated by the Secretary of the Interior and because they can be promoted and applied for by citizens around the country, I'm kind of going to walk through some information about National Recreation Trails, but then I'll also kind of walk through the process a little bit of how to apply in case there's a trail close to home that you'd want to apply to. So National Recreation Trails are existing land-based and water-based. I'll kind of get into that difference just in a different bullet point that provide close-to-home recreation opportunities. And they can be on federal, state, tribal, local lands, and they connect to the National Trail System network. Now, that connection is less of a literal one, but they're part of the system. So as I mentioned before, designated by Secretary of the Interior, if it happens to fall on Forest Service land, that's where it's designated by the Secretary of the Interior. There are currently over 1,300 NRTs in all 50 states. And then water trails, there are water trails too. So National Water Trails are a subcategory that as recently as 2012 were brought into existence through Secretarial Order 3319. And so these are, under the umbrella of National Recreation Trail, but it's a kind of a subcategory so that now we have water trails that support paddling, kayaking, canoeing, boating. So that's pretty unique as well that we have water trails as part of this system. And the goals for NRTs are really to establish trails in both urban and rural settings for people of all ages, skills, physical abilities. And as I mentioned before about that access, you might not be located close enough or within a day's drive of a national scenic or historic trail. And so these recreation trails really are meant to be trails that are close to home that you can get out to and been part of the system as well. So economic development through tourism, just as National Scenic and Historic Trails, provide healthy recreation opportunities. And they also want to protect and restore waterways and landscapes across the country as well. And so eligibility, this is if you were going to potentially apply for, a national recreation trail, the question might be who can apply? Must be open to public use, not have gaps. So we don't want a theory of a trail to be, promoted. We want the trail to exist actually how it is, and then be part of the application process or the review process. It must be, in compliance with land use plans. We also want there to be a management plan for at least 10 years. And that guarantees, I mean, y'all, with all the volunteer networks that you have set up, that's an incredible system for allowing trail maintenance to happen on these trails. So it's the same for recreation trails that we want, 10 years down the future of a management plan and a maintenance plan to know that this trail won't be, designated and then immediately fall into disrepair, that for years to come, it'll be taken care of. And then because these can cross private and public land, ask for written consent to be given. And, that can come from support from the state trail administrator as well. So again, how to apply? I mean, this kind of gets in the nitty gritty, but there's kind of two paths. And again, it depends on if it's on U.S. Forest Service land. I won't really focus on that, but you can go through the designation process through the Department of Agriculture. But the process for Department of Interior is any land outside of U.S. Forest Service land then gets put through our review process. And it's pretty easy. You can go online. There's an online application. I mean, I say it's easy, but it's not quick. It's easy in that it's online and it can all be done online. However, we do ask for a lot of documentation. You can see the list here, asking for best management practices, trail photos, contact information, all that kind of stuff. And then again, the letters by the state trail administrator as well. And just to put it out there, the deadline every year, it's a rolling application, but the deadline is November 1st every year. I know that you guys all know it's just National Trails Day, so I should have started out the whole presentation by saying, I hope you all had a wonderful National Trails Day. Usually National Trails Day every year is when the trails are officially designated. And this year we had 5 new trails designated, 3 water trails specific, and then 2 other land-based trails, but 5 national recreation trails total. So that was a huge win. Again, just building to the inventory upon that 1,300 trails that are part of national recreation trails. And then to talk about highlight partner and volunteerism. I hope I sound like a broken record thanking everyone for their time and their effort in volunteering for these trails because, from my opinion, it's pure and simple. Trails don't happen if volunteers aren't there to help take care of the trails. So just a couple things to look at here. I know these numbers are a little bit old from 2020, but the fact that if we look at this pie graph here, looking at the value of volunteer hours that's shown in the red pie slice, that's huge. What a large number for how many volunteer hours we had and the value of those volunteer hours. And, then also 942, almost 943,000 volunteer hours and almost 14,000 active volunteers worked. Again, I hope this just illustrates the importance of y'all and the work that you do. And then to talk about partners a little bit as well, because again, with volunteers also come partners and helping the trail. And so, partnerships sustain the national trail system, period. There it is. Partnerships sustain the national trail system. The administration and management of these trails is collaborative. So that included in that is federal agency partners, national nonprofit partners, interagency, and department coordination as well. So to give you an example, some federal agency partners that we have, of course, there's us, the National Park Service, but we also work with the U.S. Forest Service, the Bureau of Land Management. We work with Federal Highways Administration, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, and the list goes on. National nonprofit partners, big ones that I work with specifically in the Washington Support Office. We work with a Partnership for National Trail System, American Trails, American Hiking Society. There are so many more, especially when you get to the regional level and the trail specific. So thank you again to all the partners that we have. They are what make, they and the volunteers are what make these trails work. And then interagency department coordination, National Trail System Council that we have a National Trails Administrators Roundtable that all meets together. and then a National Recreation Trail roundtable as well. So a bunch of roundtables and councils so we can always check in with each other and make sure that we're all moving in a positive direction. And that's it. That's myself, and I'll kind of stop sharing my screen now. I'll come back on camera. Thank you all so much for listening to me give this presentation. And if there are any questions, feel free to ask. Also write down my contact information. I am the contact at the Washington Support Office level. So you can always email me if you have a question or, just want to reach out and say hi. That works too. But thank you all for listening. Thank you so much for showing up, and kind of leave it to you, Nick.
All right. Thank you so much, Lindsay.
Yeah.
What questions do you all have? That was a wealth of information,
Yeah.
lots of good stuff. And yeah, what are y'all thinking about? You could raise your hand, come off mute, drop your question in chat. Very flexible here. Anybody itching to explore a new trail? I'm always excited about those water trails. It's just so different.
Yeah, and with the National Recreation Trails too, I didn't mention, but if you go onto Google, American Trails is our partner there that helps us with the database of all those National Recreation Trails. So if you are curious and you want to jump online, you can just Google National Recreation Trails database, and a database should come up. I mean, I could even provide, I'll Google it now and then put it in the chat, and that'll give you a great database. So even if you're in a different state, I mean, I know there are programs out there and apps that you can always find a trail. But it gives you a really good database that you could go in there, look at trails close to your home, look at trails other places, and yeah, kind of start from there.
I do have a question.
Go ahead.
And I have a little bit of story to go with it if you have a quick minute. So my first through hike was in 91 and it was on the Appalachian Trail. And at that time, there were all kinds of warnings about going through, very specifically, Erwin, Tennessee, because property had been taken away from, families, and it had been in the family for generations, and it was taken away by the government to put the Appalachian Trail through. So is eminent domain still a thing?
That's a great question. And if I don't have answers to all your questions, I can certainly get you answers to all your questions. I should have stated out too that I've been in this position maybe now for about 5 months. I came from the Intermountain Regional Office as an architect for them. To my knowledge, I think that the government owns all of the land along the Appalachian Trail. I don't know if there are still any kind of land disputes out there. So I'd have to check on that and to actually get you, the answer you're looking for.
Okay.
I don't know if this helps, but just, to give a little perspective on where the North Country Trail fits in that.
Please do.
We don't have eminent domain. We work under, willing seller authority with private landowners. So we do work closely with private landowners to obtain easements and acquire land, to protect the trail and the view shed. I'm not sure about the AT's, current use of eminent domain or other trails, but it's not a tool. It's not a tool that the North Country Trail has used or intends to use.
Well, I think
that's helpful.
Very helpful. I think the Appalachian Trail is now complete, so it's no longer an issue. But back in 91, there were huge warnings because the landowners were taking their anger out on the hikers. And I distinctly remember, I don't know how they did this, but when I went through that section, there were literally miles of fish line with fish hooks in them strung along the trail. It blew my mind that someone would go to that much trouble, to punish hikers.
Yeah, and I've heard of things like that as well. Even when I thru hiked back in 2015, now just speaking from the personal side of the trail, there were warnings like that as well. So I didn't realize that might have been part of it, and part of them, part of eminent domain, part of that dispute, were the landowners. I don't know, but it's a great question. I know that we have an entire lands division that works on, buying the land from the landowners. So the history of the Appalachian Trail and the age of the Appalachian Trail, I can't say for sure. But I do know that now we have an entire division dedicated to looking and purchasing the land.
Well, I think too, back to '08, I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, and there was a huge, very wealthy ranch. I can't remember the name of it. It was in Southern California that steadfastly refused to let the trail go through their property. And I
Hmm.
think they finally did, agree to it, but what a huge battle that was. So, it's ongoing. Not
Yeah.
everybody's happy about having a trail across their property.
Exactly. And we can see it from all the different sides, but hopefully with the education of what national trails do, hopefully people understand that it's a part of our nation's history and heritage. And, we love trails at NPS. So hopefully that's a shared national vision. But I can understand empathetically from, their point of view as well.
I do have one other question, but I'll see if anybody else wants to jump in.
I do have a couple of questions in the chat. I think this question brought up a nice segue to the next one. Are there any plans to get more trails into the lower Michigan North Country Trail rather than road walks? I think similarly to what kind of Val was talking about, we rely very heavily on private landowners, and everything's kind of got to connect. So you can't just have a trail through someone's yard and then it doesn't go anywhere. So it's connecting those dots throughout the area. And it takes time and it takes a lot of planning. Next question. Has the American Discovery Trail, I believe that's what ADT stands for, been considered as a National Historic Trail?
That's a great question. I know that they were part of the group of partners that were at Hike the Hill. I don't know that specifically, though. Again, I'll write that question down, and if you do have an email address, I can get back to you on that.
You ready for my other question?
Fire away.
All right. I know in the last couple years, some of the National Scenic Trails have gone to a permit system, specifically the Pacific Crest Trail, and I think now even the AT. And I'm wondering if that's something that is generated by the National Park Service or by the organizations that manage the trail or what?
Well, I know in the case of the Pacific Crest Trail, so that is you'd have to look at the Forest Service for that. It wouldn't be because of specifically speaking, it wouldn't be because of the National Park Service. So the Forest Service, I don't want to speak for them, but I believe that they've done plenty of plans to understand, the amount of carrying capacity that a trail has, and that's just what they've recommended is the permit system.
So the associations connected with each trail they're the ones that dole out the permits, but they apparently are not responsible for coming up with that requirement.
Well, it's probably all in partnership as well. Of course, as kind of outlined, we, might administer or manage portions of the trail, but we rely on partners so heavily, for different reasons. So I'm sure the Pacific Crest Trail Association works hand in hand with again, I can't really speak specifics for them, but I'm sure the Pacific Crest Trail Association works hand in hand with the Forest Service, and they've come up with that together as a game plan for how to, manage the capacity of that trail.
So theoretically, if you couldn't get a permit, you would not be able to hike that year? Through hike if you were a through hiker?
Theoretically, or more than not being able to hike, it might also determine when you can hike. I know that's a big part as well. Just speaking again from personal experience, not as NPS, but for myself, I originally went on to get a permit and the date that I wanted quickly filled up. So I had to get a date, 2 or 3 days in advance of when I wanted. So, there always is that option too, that you might not have the day you wanted. But again, it's trying to help the carrying capacity of the trail and management too, so that there's so many factors that go into through hiking specifically.
Right.
But trying to manage all those variables and get people safely, across the trail.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thanks for the questions. It's good point in the chat about the American Discovery Trail, if it was a National Scenic Trail or a National Historic Trail. it might turn into the longest. So
We can't be beat. We can't be beat.
you just have to keep extending and extending.
Any other questions?
And that is correct that the American Discovery Trail is a national recreation trail.
Lindsay, I got a quick question for you. You put up two maps earlier. Could you share that again and show those two maps again?
Definitely. One second here. Okay, it should be sharing now. Let me know if you can see my screen. So the first one here, I'll just flip to the second that has all three national scenic, historic, and recreation trails on it.
Okay.
And to note as well, just one thing about, again, national recreation trails are just notated as a dot. Of course, there is length to that, but there's still a process for putting all of that into GIS. So that's why they're just represented as a dot and not a linear line.
Okay. You had another one also, or?
Oh, well, the one before this just showed the same map, but without the dots of national recreation trails.
Okay.
And I did drop a link into the chat if you want to get a closer look at
Okay.
that.
Very good.
Jan asked a question, how did the sizes of the National Park Service staff for each of the 11 National Scenic Trails compare?
Well, I can flip to, I don't want to make you dizzy here, but I can kind of flip and show you. I know this is just the superintendents, but I can say that we all have small staffs. So, we're always doing as much as we can with the least amount of resources we have, as we have. But a lot of these, there might only be one full-time employee, maybe a couple full-time employees, and then some volunteers or some seasonal staff as well that come on. Nick, I don't know if you want to talk about the North Country National Scenic Trail and talk about kind of your staff there as well, just to give a case study.
We currently have 5. A few months ago, we had 7, and I believe that's the most staff we've had in quite some time, or the history. We used to be combined with the Ice Age National Scenic Trail, so 1 volunteer program manager, 2 National Scenic Trails, but we have a very small staff. I will say we have a smaller staff than the Appalachian Trail, and I don't know for certain the other trails.
Yeah, I mean, Appalachian National Scenic Trail might be the largest staff, but even that is small in comparison to a national park unit. And then when you compare size and, length as well, we're not that much smaller. Trails aren't that much smaller. But that's how it goes.
Any final questions before we close out? All right.
Nick, we got one for you.
All right.
Hi, Nick.
Oh, we now
I'm
got 2.
Shelby.
Go.
I had 2 people that wanted to walk one of the long trails, and they were saying, what's the best blog site to gain information on hazards on the trails or on, people that were stealing things on the trails? And, that was kind of a question that came up. What's the answer?
It's a great question. Yeah, it depends, I guess like I'll answer, it depends. It depends on what trails you're talking about specifically. I would say go to one of our partners that we work with and kind of start there. So Pacific Crest Trail Association, Appalachian Trail Conservancy, you can kind of start with their websites. I know there are other books and blogs you can buy as well. I don't have any off the top of my head that I could offer, again, without knowing exactly what trails. But typically, if you call or reach out to the partner organizations associated with each trail, they'll be able to give you a good guidebook or blog that you can look into. So, and Google searching goes a long way as well. It was a long time ago at this point, but just being able to Google search and look through some blogs, it might take some time. But of course, there are certain things too, like water reports, that are really, really necessary when you're out there to be able to make sure that you have most up-to-date water information and things like that. So.
Somebody, Gail, if I'm seeing your name right, I can't tell if it's two names in your, but anyway, Facebook groups as well is a recommendation.
Yeah.
Yeah, there you go. Thank you, Gail.
And the other thing too, I kind of mentioned is if you can reach out to a former thru hiker. I've had people reach out to me. I've reached out to others as well, and that will give you a really good understanding of what the trail is like, the experience out there, maybe areas, again, like you're saying, to look out for, to really look forward to when you're out on the trail. So talking with a former thru hiker, I think, gives a really good example, if it is through hiking, or if you're section hiking or day hiking as well. But that can give you a really good idea and understanding of what the experience is like.
Connie, thank you for joining us. Can you talk about how the different trails are affected by the logging done on the land they cross?
That another really good question. I hate to defer all these. I think Forest Service might be better to answer that, or one of the trail actual administrators or the superintendents. From my position, these questions are great, phenomenal questions about the details behind each trail. At the Washington Support Office level, I deal a lot with like funding and kind of the overarching concepts. So I don't have an answer to your question about how logging is actually done. But if you reach out to me by email, or if you could put your email in the chat, I can find out the answer for you and find out what our ideas for what NPS how it's affected by an NPS administered trail, and or talk to my colleagues at the Forest Service as well and understand what their role is in that. And it depends too. I guess the other thing is it depends if it's in wilderness or not. Not all the trails are in wilderness. So I don't know if that could be part of the question, or if that's what you're asking as far as logging as well. But if it is in wilderness, that can then determine if you're able to bring any mechanized chainsaws, or if it all has to be handsaw if it is like in a wilderness area.
A big thank you for all of us to joining us this evening. Glad to see a couple whole chapters representing from their meetings. So excited to see that. I hope this evening inspired you to explore more of your nation's trails. Have fun and stay safe out there.